Solve this and I'll marry you.
You've got the wrong condition on the left side. Wait, what?
Erase that board. Isaiah Cole stopped with the microfiber cloth 6 inches from the lower corner of the equation. Room 418 in Bellwether University's Harlan Science Center was his last assigned classroom before lunch, and the work order clipped behind his ID badge specifically required the whiteboards to be cleaned before the afternoon seminars. He was 46, black, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped hair silvering above his ears and a faded custodial shirt that still smelled faintly of citrus disinfectant. Professor Claire Whitmore looked at the mop cart beside him before she looked at his badge. Surely facilities can send someone who understands when a board is in use. Isaiah lowered the cloth. Seminar starts at 2, right? My sheet says the room has to be reset by 1:30. Claire glanced toward the 3 graduate students gathering notebooks near the front row. And I'm telling you this material stays. Her voice had the patient edge people used when they believed patience itself proved they were reasonable. She pointed at the dense chain of symbols spanning 3 boards. This isn't a cafeteria menu. It's part of a proof. One of the students, Lena Park, checked the clock. Isaiah noticed because he had spent 20 years noticing rooms before anyone else did. Which projector fan was failing, which outlet smelled hot, which chair leg would fold under weight. He also noticed the expression on Lena's face when Claire called the equations a proof. It was brief, almost nothing, but her eyes moved to the second board as if something there bothered her. Isaiah followed her gaze and found the same thing. Then I can leave the center board, he said, but the sideboards have to be cleared for accessibility. That came down from Environmental Services after the inspection. Claire exhaled through her nose. You people have a procedure for everything. The sentence passed quickly enough that one student pretended not to hear it. Lena did not. Isaiah felt the old temptation to answer the part beneath the words instead of the words themselves. He had learned, painfully, that doing so often gave someone permission to forget what they had actually said. He unclipped the work order and held it where Claire could read the highlighted instruction. I can call my supervisor if you want an exception documented. She did not read it. Instead, she turned to the board and picked up a blue marker. Hey, you know what? Let's make this interesting. Claire circled the final expression on the second panel, where a sequence narrowed toward a boundary condition. The graduate students shifted in their seats. Isaiah knew enough from their reaction to understand this was not an ordinary classroom exercise. Claire added 2 short lines beneath the expression, then capped the marker with a sharp click. This problem has been irritating my research group for 6 months. Solve it, and I'll marry you. A nervous laugh came from the back row. Claire smiled as if the laughter had proved the joke harmless. Then you can decide what gets erased. Isaiah looked at her for a moment. He thought of saying that his wife had been dead 7 years and that he was not looking for replacements, especially not from mathematics departments. The line almost amused him, which made him resent the situation more. Instead, he set the cleaning cloth on the cart. You've got the wrong condition on the left side. The room changed in a quieter way than Claire expected. No gasp, no dramatic silence. Lena simply sat straighter. Claire's smile held. Excuse me? Isaiah pointed without touching the board. That substitution assumes the boundary stays fixed when the parameter changes. But 3 lines up, you let the parameter depend on time. If that moves, your boundary term moves with it. Claire looked at the equation then, at him. Isn't what it says? It is if the notation means what it usually means. One of the students opened his laptop. Lena was already flipping backward through several pages of handwritten notes. Claire stepped between Isaiah and the board. I don't know what game you think you're playing, but this is a graduate research seminar. I'm cleaning a room you asked me not to clean, and now you're disrupting academic work. Isaiah picked up his cloth again, but Lena spoke before he could turn away. Professor, wait. She had found the page she wanted. Her finger down the margin. He's right about the dependency. We changed it after the March simulation. Claire took the notebook from her, read 2 lines, and handed it back too quickly. That is not the issue. Isaiah understood then that the equation had stopped being the problem. Claire pulled out her phone. I'm documenting this with facilities and the department office. You were instructed to leave research material untouched, and instead you interfered with a faculty session. Lena stared at her. He didn't interfere, you challenged him. Claire was already typing. Isaiah looked once more at the blue circle around the equation. 6 months, she had said. He could see why. Before he pushed the cart toward the door, Claire's email notification sounded from her phone. Somewhere in facilities, a complaint now carried his employee number and the phrase unauthorized disruption. Isaiah had made it halfway down the fourth-floor corridor when Marcus Bell, his shift supervisor, called his radio. The request was simple. Return to room 418 and wait for someone from the department office. By the time Isaiah rolled the cart back, Professor Whitmore had moved from irritation to procedure. She stood near the lectern with her laptop open, speaking to Dr. Evan Mercer, the associate chair, while the 3 graduate students remained in the room. On the screen, Isaiah caught fragments of the complaint before Claire angled it away. Disruption, refusal to follow faculty instruction, inappropriate comments during research activity. A. Mercer was a narrow man in his early 50s who wore reading glasses on a cord and seemed uncomfortable with any conversation that could become an official problem. Mr. Cole, Professor Whitmore says she asked you to preserve active research material and you challenged her in front of students instead. He glanced at the cart, then at Isaiah's badge. Is that accurate? No. Isaiah unclipped the work order again. I told her the sideboards had to be cleared because of the room reset. She told me to stop, so I stopped. Then she put a problem on the board and asked me to solve it. Claire gave a small laugh. It was obviously a joke. Lena looked down at her notebook. Mercer focused on Isaiah. Did you make comments about Professor Whitmore's research? She asked me to solve something. Really? I told her the boundary condition looked inconsistent. You told me I was wrong, Claire said. I told you what I saw. Mercer held up one hand. Let's not argue the mathematics. That isn't really the issue here. The phrasing landed oddly with Isaiah because 10 minutes earlier, mathematics had been the only reason Claire claimed he should not touch the board. Mercer continued. The concern is professional boundaries. Custodial staff should not be interrupting faculty instruction or engaging students in disputes about academic content. Isaiah looked toward the empty desks. There wasn't a class happening. Claire closed her laptop. This was a research meeting. Then why were you leaving the room? One of the students coughed into his fist. Mercer's expression tightened. Mr. Cole, cooperation would help. That word did what Isaiah had expected it to do. The complaint was no longer about a board, or even about an equation. It was becoming a description of his temperament. He knew the pattern well enough to feel his shoulders stiffen, and he disliked that Claire noticed. I am cooperating. I'm also answering the question you asked. Marcus arrived at the doorway, breathing a little harder than usual from the stairs. He was black, 62, with a gray mustache and a habit of tugging one glove halfway off whenever he needed to think. I pulled the work order, he said. Isaiah was assigned the reset. Sideboards were included. Mercer nodded without looking relieved. It may be so, but faculty can request preservation of instructional material. Sure, Marcus said, usually by putting in a hold before the cleaning window. Claire crossed her arms. I shouldn't need a bureaucratic form to keep 6 months of work from being wiped away. Lena looked up. Professor, the board wasn't 6 months of work. Claire turned toward her. It was yesterday's reconstruction, Lena said more quietly now. Most of the derivation is in the shared repository. Mercer's gaze moved from Lena to Claire. Is that correct? Claire hesitated just long enough for Isaiah to notice. The board contains a working version that matters to the group. That wasn't my question, Mercer said. For the first time, Claire seemed less interested in Isaiah than in controlling the shape of the room. Yes, the main derivation is stored. But that does not excuse what happened. Isaiah stepped toward the second board, stopping well short of it. The blue circle around the expression was still there. So was the dependency Lena had mentioned, marked in a different color from the rest of the notation. If you want to know what happened, check when that line was changed. Claire's eyes sharpened. Don't touch anything. I'm not touching it. Lena opened the shared repository on her laptop. There should be version history. Mercer exhaled. No one needs to conduct an investigation in the classroom, but Lena was already scrolling. The time-dependent parameter was added March 17th. Professor Whitmore approved the update. Claire moved beside her. That doesn't prove his interpretation. No, Lena said. But it proves the condition changed. Marcus looked at Isaiah. You knew that from the board. Isaiah waited before answering. He had spent years learning when explanation helped and when it merely invited someone to turn knowledge into suspicion. I recognized the structure. Mercer closed his notebook. Until we sort this out, Mr. Cole, I'm asking you to leave this floor. Marcus, reassign him for the afternoon. Isaiah stared at him. On what basis? Temporary separation. To keep things from escalating. Claire said nothing. Marcus's half-removed glove stopped in his hand. Lena looked from Mercer to Isaiah, then quietly clicked the export icon on the version history page before anyone could close the laptop. Marcus did not move immediately. He looked at Mercer, then at the work order still clipped in Isaiah's hand. Temporary separation from a floor is usually for a safety issue, an active confrontation, or a facilities problem, he said. Which one are we calling this? Mercer adjusted his glasses. Yay. We're not calling it anything yet. I'm trying to prevent further disruption. Isaiah heard the shift clearly. Not accusation now, but containment. He had been on campus long enough to know how quickly a temporary instruction became an entry in a personnel file, especially once someone higher up decided the paperwork sounded cleaner than the event itself. He folded the work order once, then stopped himself and flattened it again against the cart handle. If I leave, I want the reason written down. Claire gave a short, disbelieving laugh. This is exactly what I mean. Every request becomes a confrontation. No, Isaiah said. Every request becomes a record if someone changes the story afterward. Marcus looked at him, not quite approving and not quite warning. Isaiah knew that look. And he was pushing harder than Marcus would have advised. The wiser move might have been to leave, finish the shift, and let the union steward handle it later. But Isaiah had made that kind of retreat before. Years earlier, at a different university, he had accepted a written warning for entering a laboratory he had been assigned to clean because a researcher insisted he had wandered in. The warning had stayed in his file after the researcher admitted the door schedule had been wrong. Isaiah had told himself then that keeping the job mattered more than correcting the wording. He still hated remembering how reasonable that had felt. Mercer pulled out his phone. Fine, I'll email facilities that you're being reassigned pending review of a faculty complaint. Put in that I disputed the complaint. That can be addressed later. That means no. Claire stepped closer to Mercer. Ivan, this is becoming absurd. Lena closed her laptop, but not before Isaiah noticed a small download icon complete at the corner of the screen. Dr. Mercer, she said, if you're documenting this, you should document what Professor Whitmore said too. Claire's face tightened. Lena, you told him to solve the problem and said you'd marry him if he did. Mercer looked at Claire. You said that. It was a joke. To a staff member you were already arguing with. Claire's cheeks colored. I was trying to defuse the situation. The other graduate student nearest the aisle shifted in his chair. It didn't sound like that. Claire turned. Owen, stay out of this. That was enough to make him look up. I was in the room. For the first time, the balance changed in a way Isaiah could actually use. Not because anyone suddenly respected his interpretation of the equation, and not because Mercer had decided the complaint was wrong. Two witnesses had simply made it harder to reduce the event to one professor's summary. Isaiah felt relief arrive too early and distrusted it. Mercer noticed the same thing. His tone became more formal. Everyone stop. No one deletes anything from the course repository or from any device related to this meeting. I'm asking the department administrator to preserve the seminar materials and the complaint correspondence until we understand what happened. Claire stared at him. You're treating me like I'm under investigation. I'm preserving records. You said this wasn't an investigation. It wasn't 5 minutes ago. That sentence cost Claire some of her certainty. She looked toward the board as if it had betrayed her. Isaiah followed her gaze and saw the handwritten boundary term again. Something about it tugged at him, not just mathematically but visually. The notation beside the time-dependent parameter used a compact lowercase script he remembered seeing decades earlier in engineering journals, back when his days had been filled with differential models instead of cleaning schedules. Marcus touched Isaiah's elbow. Come on, we'll go downstairs. Isaiah nodded, but before he turned, Claire said, for the record, he still had no business commenting on research he doesn't understand. Lena. Expression changed. Isaiah almost answered. Anger rose fast enough to make the back of his neck warm, and for 1 second he wanted to tell Claire exactly where he had learned to read equations like hers. Instead, he looked at Mercer. Add that sentence too. Then he pushed the cart into the corridor. At the service elevator, Marcus pressed the basement button. "You want to tell me what that was back there?" Isaiah watched the floor numbers begin to descend. Not yet. His phone vibrated before the doors opened. The message was from Human Resources, requesting a formal statement before the end of shift. A second notification followed from Lena. She had sent him the exported version history. The basement break room had one window, a narrow strip of glass at ceiling height that showed only shoes passing outside. Isaiah sat beneath it with Lena's export open on his phone while Marcus filled 2 paper cups from the coffee machine. The version history confirmed what she had said upstairs. The model had been changed in March, but the boundary condition had not changed with it. What bothered Isaiah more was the comment attached to that revision. "Keep legacy condition for comparison," Claire had written. Comparison was one thing. Presenting it as the active condition was another. Marcus set a cup beside him. "You going to answer HR? I have to. That wasn't what I asked." Isaiah looked at the coffee, then at the phone. "You think I should wait for the union steward? I think you should stop treating every bad room like you have to stand in it alone." The words caught harder than Isaiah expected. He had spent years refusing help because help usually came with questions, and questions eventually reached the part of his life he preferred to keep closed. Before Bellwether, before night shifts and maintenance certifications, there had been a doctorate program in applied mathematics, then a research fellowship, then 2 years caring for his wife after her diagnosis. He had left the fellowship believing he would return. He never did. After she died, returning felt less like ambition and more like entering a house where every piece of furniture still remembered someone. Marcus waited. Isaiah rubbed a thumb along the paper cup seam. "I studied this stuff." "How much is studied?" "Enough," Marcus sighed. "You do realize that answer makes people want to shake you." Despite himself, Isaiah smiled. "Been told that." The humor faded when another HR email arrived. This one included Claire's complaint as an attachment. Isaiah read it twice. She described him as refusing a direct instruction, making unsolicited claims about faculty research, and persisting after being asked to remain within the scope of his assigned duties. The marriage remark was absent. So was the challenge. Marcus read over his shoulder. There it is. Isaiah opened a blank statement. For 3 minutes he typed too fast. He wrote that Claire had mocked him, that Mercer had accepted her framing, that nobody would have spoken that way to someone wearing a faculty badge. Then he stopped. The sentences were true to his anger but weak as a record. He deleted half of them. Marcus watched without commenting. Isaiah started again with times, locations, exactutions, and names. He attached the work order. He noted that 2 graduate students had witnessed Claire's challenge and that Mercer had ordered preservation of relevant materials. He did not attach Lena's export. Marcus noticed. "Why hold that back? Because she sent it to me. I don't know if she was authorized to." That's cautious. It's also her risk, not mine. For once, saying that aloud made Isaiah recognize the flaw in his own instinct. He had been thinking about proof before thinking about the student who preserved it. Lena could lose access to her research group, funding, recommendations, perhaps more. He sent her a short message telling her not to forward anything else until she understood the university's policy and asking whether she wanted her name withheld from his statement. Her reply came almost immediately. "Too late. Professor Whitmore removed me from the project workspace." Isaiah stared at the screen. Merce leaned closer. "That's new. And worse." Upstairs, Lena was learning the same lesson from the other side. She had returned to her shared office after Mercer dismissed the group and found that her repository permissions had changed from editor to viewer. At first, she assumed it was an automated response to the preservation request. Then Owen sent her a screenshot showing he still had full access. She called Mercer instead of confronting Claire. "I need you to tell me exactly what changed," he said. "My right access is gone. Do not attempt to restore it yourself." "I wasn't going to. Take screenshots showing your current permissions and the time. Send them to the department administrator and copy me." Lena hesitated. "Professor Whitmore controls my assistantship next semester." Mercer was quiet for several seconds. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its administrative smoothness. "Then do not contact her about this alone." By the time Isaiah submitted his HR statement, the issue no longer fit inside Claire's complaint. A faculty member had made a humiliating challenge to an employee, a student had contradicted her account, and that student had then lost access to the research workspace she had helped maintain. Isaiah should have felt vindicated. Instead, he felt responsible. He called Lena before he could talk himself out of it. "You shouldn't have to lose your work because you backed me up." "I didn't back you up," she said after a pause. "I said what happened. That distinction matters. It does to me." Isaiah looked again at the exported history. "Then keep making it." A notification appeared while they were still speaking. Mercer had sent a preservation notice to the department administrator, IT Research Services, and Human Resources. It covered the complaint, access changes, repository history, and classroom materials from room 418. For the first time, Claire Whitmore could no longer control which version of the afternoon survived. By 9 the next morning, Bellwether's Research Systems Office had restored Lena's access under a preservation lock that prevented anyone in the project group from altering older versions without creating a visible audit entry. Claire had not been suspended, fired, or escorted anywhere. She had simply lost the ability to make the problem disappear through ordinary housekeeping. For Isaiah, that distinction mattered. Institutions rarely changed because someone finally recognized a villain. They changed when enough ordinary controls stopped bending in the same direction. Mercer asked Isaiah to meet in a small conference room off the mathematics department, this time with Marcus, an HR representative named Denise Warren, and a union steward present. Claire sat at the opposite end of the table with her department chair. Lena was not there. Isaiah was relieved by that. Whatever came next should not require a graduate student to sit between her professor and a man she had defended once already. Denise began with the work order, then the complaint, then the preserved repository history. She did not ask Isaiah to explain mathematics until the basic chronology was settled. Claire had instructed him not to erase the board. He had stopped. She had challenged him publicly. 2 students confirmed the wording. He had identified a possible inconsistency. Claire then complained that he had exceeded the scope of his job. Lena's access changed less than an hour after she contradicted Claire's version of events. Claire's chair turned toward her. "Did you remove Lena's permissions? I restricted access to protect the project after she exported internal material. Before or after you knew she had exported it?" Claire paused. Denise looked at the access log. The restriction occurred at 2:41. The export alert was generated at 2:47. The room did not need commentary. Claire folded her hands. "I was concerned she was research outside the group." "With whom?" Mercer asked. She had already sided with Mr. Cole. Isaiah felt something cold settle behind his ribs. The equation had become almost irrelevant. This was the first time Claire had described Lena's factual account as disloyalty. Denise turned to Isaiah. "You said yesterday that you recognized the structure. We need to understand how." He looked at Marcus, who gave the smallest nod. Isaiah had imagined this moment differently for years. In some versions, someone discovered an old paper with his name on it and suddenly regretted underestimating him. In others, he told the story himself and enjoyed watching assumptions collapse. Sitting there now, he felt none of that. His old academic life was not a hidden crown. It was simply part of his life, and he was tired of treating it like contraband. "I completed doctoral coursework in applied mathematics at Midwestern State," he said. "Nonlinear systems and numerical analysis. I left during my dissertation period." Claire stared at him. Isaiah continued before anyone could turn the admission into spectacle. "My wife got sick. I became her primary caregiver. I didn't finish." The department chair leaned back slowly. "How long ago?" 17 years, and you've worked in custodial services here for 11. Claire finally spoke. "So you never earned the doctorate?" "No." The sentence came quickly enough that Marcus looked at her. Isaiah did not. "That's correct." Claire seemed almost relieved. "Then this is being distorted. Having taken graduate courses years ago does not make him qualified to evaluate current research." "No one said it did," Denise replied. Mercer slid a printed page across the table. "But Research Services asked Professor Anand Shah to examine the specific notation in question without being told who raised the concern." Claire's posture changed. Isaiah looked down at the page. Shah was a professor in engineering mathematics, someone Isaiah knew only from building schedules and seminar posters. Mercer tapped the final paragraph. "His conclusion is that the active model and the retained boundary condition are inconsistent unless an additional constraint exists elsewhere in the derivation. He recommended rerunning the simulation." Claire reached for the paper. He hasn't seen the full model. Correct, Mercer said, which is why this is not a finding of research error. It is a finding that Mr. Cole's observation was technically plausible and should not have been treated as misconduct. That was the reversal Isaiah had expected to feel larger. Instead, his attention stayed on Claire's earlier sentence about Lena. Denise closed the complaint folder. The facilities complaint is being withdrawn from Mr. Cole's personnel process. Separately, the department will review the access restriction and whether it constituted retaliation against a student witness. Claire looked from Denise to Mercer. You're opening a retaliation review over one permission change? No, Mercer said, over the reason you just gave us for making it. Outside the conference room, the hallway floor polisher started its low mechanical hum. Isaiah recognized the sound immediately. One of his crew was working the east corridor exactly on schedule. For the first time since room 418, his job sounded ordinary again. The department's first instinct was to put everything into separate boxes. Facilities would close Isaiah's personnel complaint. Mathematics would examine Claire's conduct toward Lena. Research services would test the model. HR would decide whether the original exchange crossed workplace policy. That division made sense on paper, but by Thursday afternoon Isaiah could see the danger in it. If each office handled only the piece that belonged to them, no one would ever have to look at the sequence as a whole. He was cleaning a seminar room on the 3rd floor when Marcus found him replacing a cracked caster on a lectern. Mercer wants you upstairs again. Isaiah tightened the last screw. Another meeting? Not exactly. That means yes. Marcus almost smiled. Field test. The frame belonged more to engineering than administration, which was why Isaiah followed him without argument. In the computing lab, 2 workstations had been reserved for Professor Shaw and a research analyst from the engineering school. Lena sat near the window with Owen, both of them carrying notebooks rather than laptops. Claire was absent. Mercer explained that research services had copied the disputed model into a protected sandbox and removed identifying comments before handing it to Shaw. The goal was narrow: test whether the boundary condition mattered enough to change the result. Isaiah stayed near the door. Why am I here? Shaw looked over from the workstation. He was in his late 50s with a loose tie and the distracted expression of someone who had been thinking about equations before breakfast. Because you saw the problem first. That doesn't make me part of the research group. No, Shaw said. It makes you a relevant observer. Isaiah disliked how much relief that sentence gave him. The first run reproduced Claire's published internal result almost exactly. A curve flattened, crossed a threshold, and stabilized. Shaw changed only the boundary treatment. The second run did not stabilize. The curve bent later, overshot, and split into 2 possible outcomes depending on the initial condition. Owen leaned closer to the monitor. Lena did not move at all. That's not a small correction, she said. Shaw shook his head. No, but be careful. This still doesn't tell us whether the research conclusion is wrong. It tells us the current simulation is sensitive to a condition the group treated as fixed. Mercer looked toward Isaiah. Does that match what you thought? Isaiah could have said yes. Instead, he studied the graph. Mostly. Shaw turned in his chair. Mostly. The second run still assumes the response delay is constant. Lena looked at him. It is constant. Isaiah pointed to a note in the model specification taped beside the workstation. Then why does the calibration table use 3 different delay values? For several seconds, nobody answered. Shaw pulled the specification closer. The analyst opened a separate file and checked the calibration data. Isaiah felt the old intellectual rhythm return before he wanted it to. Discrepancy, test, constraint, repeat. It had once made whole nights disappear. Now it made his stomach tighten. Lena broke the silence. Those values came from separate trials. Then the model needs to know which trial it's in, Isaiah said. Shaw nodded slowly. Or the delay needs to be treated as a parameter. Mercer stepped back from the workstation as if physical distance might keep the problem from expanding. How long would verification take? A proper rerun, Shaw asked. Days, maybe a week, depending on documentation. Longer if the source code and calibration notes don't agree. Owen rubbed both hands over his face. Our conference submission is Monday. There it was, Isaiah realized. The first real cost that had nothing to do with Claire's embarrassment or his complaint. Lena and Owen had months of work attached to a deadline. A flawed model could damage them if submitted, but stopping it could damage them too. Lena stared at the graph. If we withdraw now, we lose the presentation slot. If you submit something you no longer trust, you may lose more, Shah said. She turned toward Isaiah. Easy for everyone to say when it isn't their fellowship review. The words hit him harder because they were fair. He had been so focused on preventing Claire from controlling the record that he had not fully considered what preserving the truth might cost the students who depended on it. I know, he said. Lena's mouth tightened. You don't! Isaiah almost defended himself, then stopped. She was right about that, too. He knew what it meant to leave academia. He did not know what it meant to be 27 and watch a faculty dispute swallow the work that might decide whether you stayed. Mercer proposed a temporary hold on the submission until Shah completed an independent verification. Owen agreed immediately. Lena did not. She asked for 24 hours to review the model herself before any withdrawal became final. Shah looked at Mercer. That's reasonable. Mercer nodded. 24 hours. Protected access. No retaliation, no unilateral changes, and no submission until the review is complete. Lena gathered her notebook without looking at Isaiah. As she passed him, she stopped. If you're right about the delay, too, I need to know tonight. Isaiah looked at the monitor, then at her. For 17 years, he had avoided stepping back into this kind of room. Really, now someone's future depended on whether he would. Isaiah did not answer Lena immediately. He looked past her toward the protected workstation, where the two simulation curves remained frozen on the monitor. 17 years earlier, he would have stayed until sunrise to resolve a discrepancy like that. Now he had a custodial shift ending at 6, a bus to catch, and a habit of keeping mathematics behind a locked door in his own life. Send me the calibration notes, he said at last. Not the whole project. Just the delay tables and the assumptions tied to them. Lena studied him as if deciding whether that was enough. Research services can give you read-only access. I don't want access to anything I don't need. Shah nodded from the workstation. Good answer. That evening, Isaiah sat at his kitchen table with 3 printed pages, a legal pad, and the cheap mechanical pencil he used for household measurements. The apartment was quiet except for the refrigerator cycling on and the upstairs neighbor dragging something heavy across the floor. He had intended to work for an hour. 2 passed. The calibration table used 3 response delay values, just as he had noticed, but the main code treated the delay as fixed. At first, the mismatch looked careless. And then Isaiah found a footnote identifying the values as measurements taken under 3 load conditions. He ran his finger down the page. The flaw was not that the researchers had ignored variation. They had assumed the variation would disappear after normalization. Isaiah wrote the transformation out by hand. Halfway through, he realized he had made a mistake. The normalization did remove part of the dependence. His first criticism in the lab had been too broad. He sat back, annoyed less by being wrong than by how quickly certainty had returned to him once someone invited him into the problem. That had always been his weakness. When a pattern felt familiar, he trusted recognition before finishing the arithmetic. He called Lena. You were right about the 3 values, she said before he could speak. I've been checking them. I was also wrong. There was a pause. About what? The delay doesn't need to vary the way I said. Your normalization absorbs most of it. Lena exhaled. Most? That's the part you should look at, he explained the remaining term. It was small enough to disappear under ordinary conditions, but near the threshold where Claire's model claimed stabilization, it could matter. Lena did not respond for several seconds. So we still have a problem. We have a question. Don't upgrade it before you test it. She gave a tired laugh. You sound like Shah. Then Shah sounds sensible. By 8 the next morning, Lena had built the alternative run herself inside the protected environment. Shah supervised. Isaiah arrived after his first floor cleaning round and stood beside Marcus near the back wall rather than at the workstation. The new result did not explode the model or overturn the field. It did something more inconvenient. The supposed stable zone narrowed significantly. Under one of the load conditions, the system crossed back into instability. Owen stared at the output. Our conclusion says the stabilization is robust. Then the conclusion is too strong, Lena said. Shah agreed. The underlying work may still be publishable. The claim has to change. Mercer, who had joined by video, asked the question everyone had been avoiding. Can the conference submission be corrected before Monday? Technically, yes, Lena said. If we rewrite the results section and rerun the sensitivity analysis, and if Claire refuses, no one answered at first. The door opened behind them. Claire entered with her department chair. She had been allowed to attend because the verification concerned research she led, but research services had restricted her from altering the protected copy. She looked at the monitor, then at Lena. "You ran this without me." "Under an independent review," Shah said. Claire ignored him. "Lena, you understand what happens if we weaken that conclusion now. Reviewers will think the entire model is unstable." Lena closed the notebook in front of her. "Then we explain exactly what is stable and what isn't. We lose the conference slot. Maybe we lose funding momentum. Maybe." Claire's voice sharpened. "And you are willing to damage 3 years of work because a janitor walked into a room and made a guess?" Isaiah felt Marcus shift beside him. Lena did not. "No. I'm willing to change a sentence because the model changed when we tested an assumption." Claire looked toward Isaiah. "You've inserted yourself far enough," Isaiah almost answered, but Shah spoke first. "Mr. Cole is finished with the technical review unless we request something further. The result stands independently of him." That mattered more than any defense Isaiah could have offered. Mercer's voice came through the speaker. "Professor Whitmore, the submission is on administrative hold until the corrected analysis is reviewed. You may challenge the methodology through the normal research process, but you may not remove Lena or Owen from the project, alter their access, or submit the original version elsewhere." Claire stared at the screen. "Taking control of my research." "No," Mercer said. "We're preventing a disputed version from being represented as final." Lena opened the new sensitivity report and placed it beside the original conclusion. For the first time, the equation Claire had used as a joke had given something none of them could laugh away. The formal review began Friday morning in the engineering school's simulation lab rather than a conference room. Shah insisted on it. If the dispute concerned what the model did under different conditions, he wanted the decision tied to something people could run, inspect, and repeat. The 2 protected workstations faced a wall display. Research services had frozen the relevant code version, calibration notes, and repository history. Claire sat with her department chair. Lena and Owen sat together across the aisle. Isaiah remained near the back with Marcus, Denise from HR, and the union steward. Shah opened without ceremony. "There are 2 questions, and they should stay separate. First, was Mr. Cole's observation technically credible? We already know the answer is yes. Does the disputed assumption materially affect the conference claim? That is what we test today." He nodded to the analyst who loaded the original configuration. The familiar curve appeared, flattening inside the range Claire's abstract described as robust stabilization. Claire leaned forward. "That result has been reproduced repeatedly." "Under this configuration," Shah said. The analyst loaded the corrected boundary treatment Lena had verified, then expanded the sensitivity sweep around the load threshold. The new graph appeared beside the first. Most of the operating range still behaved as Claire's group expected. Near the upper threshold, however, the stable region narrowed and then fractured under one calibration condition. Shah did not dramatize it. A central mechanism survives. The robustness claim does not survive in its current wording. Claire looked at Lena. "You understand that narrowing the claim this late will look like uncertainty." "It is uncertainty," Lena said. Her voice was tired rather than defiant. "That's what the run shows. And you think reviewers reward that?" Owen shifted beside her. "You punish claims they can reproduce and find overstated." Claire turned on him. "You've both had 3 years of access to this model. Neither of you identified this until a custodial employee made a comment in a classroom." Isaiah felt the familiar pull to defend himself, but Shah had already removed him from the technical center of the dispute. He stayed quiet. Denise did not. "Professor Whitmore, that comment matters for the employment review. Please do not use Mr. Cole's job classification as an argument about whether the mathematics is correct." Claire looked at her. "I'm describing context." "No," Denise said. "You're describing status. The distinction sat in the room longer than any accusation would have." Shah moved to the second issue. He asked Claire to explain why the legacy boundary condition remained in the active version after the March parameter change. Her answer was technically plausible. The group had retained it to preserve comparability across runs. Shah agreed that researchers sometimes did exactly that. Then he asked the question Claire had avoided since room 418. Where is that exception documented in the current model notes? Claire opened the project specification. She searched once, then again. Lena spoke softly. It isn't. Claire's chair looked toward her. Was it documented elsewhere? In meeting notes, Claire said. Field Research Services had already checked. The analyst brought up the preserved notes. The exception appeared in one early discussion, but later summaries treated the configuration as if it were ordinary rather than provisional. No single document proved misconduct. Together, the sequence showed something less dramatic and more consequential. A temporary research shortcut had hardened into an unexamined assumption. Claire folded her arms. Then correct the notes and move forward. Why are we still involving HR? Denise opened a separate file. Because the research issue and your conduct are not the same issue. You challenged an employee publicly. He used his assigned role to dismiss a technically plausible observation, filed a complaint that omitted the challenge itself, and then removed a student witness's access after she contradicted your account. Ilsum. I restricted access because I believed confidential material was leaving the group. And the audit log shows the restriction happened before the export alert. Claire's department chair looked down at the table. For the first time, Claire did not answer immediately. When she finally spoke, the certainty in her voice had thinned. I was angry. Lena embarrassed me in front of staff. Lena looked at her. I corrected the timeline. Claire's eyes moved away. Sir, joined by video for the final decision. The conference submission would remain on hold for 48 hours while Lena and Owen revised the robustness claim under Shaw's independent review. Sir, would remain principal investigator for the moment, but her authority over student access and authorship decisions would be temporarily shared with the department chair pending the retaliation review. HR would remove Isaiah's complaint from any disciplinary track and open a separate workplace conduct review based on the preserved accounts. Isaiah listened without satisfaction. Nobody had been destroyed. Nobody had magically lost a career in 10 minutes. What had changed was narrower and, to him, more real. Claire could no longer turn a joke into a complaint, a witness into a disloyal student, or an inconvenient assumption into someone else's misunderstanding without another person checking the record. As people began gathering papers, Shaw walked over to Isaiah. There's one thing I still want from you. Isaiah glanced at the workstation. Not a proof, Shaw said. A decision. He handed Isaiah a temporary visitor form for an evening numerical methods workshop open to staff and students. Isaiah read it twice before folding it into his shirt pocket. Isaiah kept the workshop form in his pocket through the rest of his shift without filling it out. By 5:30, he had replaced 2 damaged chair glides, cleared a clogged sink in the faculty lounge, and listened to Marcus complain about a vending machine that had taken his dollar twice. The ordinary work helped. It reminded Isaiah that one difficult week did not automatically require him to rebuild his life around an old skill simply because someone had finally noticed it. The first concrete decision arrived before he clocked out. HR sent him a written notice confirming that Claire's complaint would not enter his personnel file, that his 4th floor reassignment was being rescinded, and that facilities would receive a clarification on how faculty preservation requests had to be documented during cleaning windows. Marcus read the notice over his shoulder. So next time somebody wants a board saved, they use the form instead of deciding you're the problem. That's the idea. You don't sound pressed. Isaiah folded the notice. A form won't stop somebody from being disrespectful. No. But it can stop disrespect from turning into your discipline record. That was harder to argue with. Upstairs, the mathematics department made its own temporary decision. Remained on faculty duty but was removed from sole control over Lena's and Owen's assistantship evaluations until the retaliation review concluded. The department chair became the second required approver for research access, authorship changes, and conference submissions involving the group. Claire objected in writing, arguing that the restrictions undermined her ability to lead the project. Mercer's response was brief. The restrictions addressed decision-making authority, not academic disagreement. The cost landed fastest on Lena. The conference organizers allowed a corrected abstract, but only if the revised analysis arrived by Sunday evening. She and Owen spent most of Saturday rebuilding plots under Shaw's supervision. When Isaiah passed the engineering lab during an overtime cleaning round, Lena was asleep with her forehead on her crossed arms while a simulation ran. He almost kept walking. Instead, he set a paper cup of coffee beside her notebook. She woke when the cup touched the table. "You don't have to keep rescuing me." "I brought coffee. You know what I mean." Isaiah pulled out the chair across from her. "Probably." Lena rubbed her eyes. "If we miss the deadline, my fellowship review committee sees a withdrawn presentation. If we submit, we have to explain why the conclusion changed. Either way, this follows me." Isaiah nodded. "Hey, that's true." She looked irritated by the lack of reassurance. "That's all? No. I can tell you it won't matter, but I don't know that. I can tell you doing the right thing always works out, but I've lived long enough to know better." Lena stared into the coffee. "What I can tell you," he continued, "is that if somebody asks why the conclusion changed, you have an answer you can defend." She gave a tired half-smile. "I really hate comforting people. My wife used to say that." The mention surprised both of them. Isaiah stood before the conversation could become heavier. "Your run finished. The new output held. The corrected model still produced a useful result, just a narrower one." Lena and Owen rewrote the abstract that afternoon. Shah signed the verification note Sunday morning, and Mercer released the administrative hold in time for submission. The presentation slot survived. Claire's situation did not resolve as quickly. The preliminary retaliation review found enough concern to continue a formal inquiry, but not enough to suspend her from teaching. The department informed her that witness contact regarding the incident had to go through designated channels, and that any further access changes required approval. It was not the dramatic consequence people in the hallway had already begun inventing. It was slower, procedural, and restrictive in exactly the places where her discretion had become part of the problem. Monday afternoon, Isaiah returned to room 418 for the first time since the incident. The sideboards had been cleaned according to the new preservation procedure. A small magnetic card near the door now listed how faculty could request a board hold before custodial reset. The center board still carried a fragment of the disputed derivation, this time with the corrected condition written beneath it. Shah was waiting near the lectern. "You missed the workshop," he said. "I know. Changed your mind?" Isaiah took the folded visitor form from his pocket. The creases had gone soft from 5 days of carrying it. "No," he said. "I just haven't made it yet." He set the form on the lectern instead of throwing it away. The formal retaliation finding arrived 11 days later, which was fast by university standards and slow enough for rumors to outrun it. Isaiah heard 3 different versions before HR sent the actual notice. Claire had been fired, Claire had been cleared, Claire was suing the university. None was true. The review found that her removal of Lena's access had been retaliatory, because it followed directly from Lena's participation as a witness, and because Claire's stated justification did not match the audit timeline. The finding did not end Claire's employment. It did trigger a written sanction, mandatory supervisory restrictions, and a year of oversight on student evaluations, research access, and authorship decisions. Lena read the decision in Shah's office with Owen beside her. She did not celebrate. "So she still grades my seminar. Your seminar grade's being co-reviewed," Shah said. "That's not what I asked." "No," he admitted. "It isn't." Lena folded the letter once and placed it on the desk. She had spent almost 2 weeks waiting for someone to say the situation was over, only to discover that institutional correction rarely offered clean endings. Claire would still walk the same corridors. She might still pass in faculty meetings, seminars, and research events. Protection did not mean absence. It meant boundaries other people were now responsible for enforcing. Claire requested a meeting with Lena through the department chair. Lena initially refused. 2 days later, she changed her mind, but only if Shah attended and the discussion stayed focused on the project. Isaiah learned about it afterward from Lena, who found him replacing a fluorescent driver in the undergraduate lab. "She apologized," Lena said. Isaiah climbed down from the ladder. "For what?" "That was my first question, too." Claire had apologized for restricting access and for allowing anger to affect a research decision. She had not apologized for the joke in room 418 or for the way she had described Isaiah's role until Lena forced the subject. She said she didn't intend it the way it sounded. Lena continued. Isaiah set the screwdriver into his tool pouch, and I told her intent wasn't the part I had witnessed. He nodded once. Lena watched him. You don't want to know what she said about you? I can guess. You probably can't. Claire had admitted that she remembered seeing Isaiah in the mathematics building years earlier, not as a custodian but as someone attending a colloquium with an older professor from Midwestern state. She had not recognized him consciously when he entered room 418. At least, she claimed she had not. What unsettled her, she told Lena, realizing afterward that some part of her had registered familiarity and still sorted him first by uniform. Isaiah sat on the edge of a lab bench. "That bother you?" Lena asked. Yes, more than the joke, he thought about it. Different kind of bother. The joke had been easy to name once witnesses repeated it. Claire's admission was harder because it removed the comfort of simple ignorance. She had not mocked him because there was no evidence he belonged near mathematics. She had mocked him despite a faint memory that he might. The uniform had been stronger than uncertainty. Bellwether responded to the larger sequence with changes that were modest enough to sound unimpressive and concrete enough to matter. Faculty could no longer make informal preservation demands that overrode custodial room resets without logging them. Student research access changes required a second approver during active disputes. Witnesses in academic conduct reviews received written anti-retaliation protections automatically rather than by request. Facilities staff gained a formal route to challenge complaints before temporary reassignment became part of a personnel record. Marcus called the last change the Isaiah clause until Isaiah told him to stop. "It doesn't have your name on it," Marcus said. "Good, you're impossible. I've heard." The corrected conference paper was accepted. Not praised as revolutionary, not rescued by miracle, just accepted after reviewers asked for one additional sensitivity test. Lena forwarded Isaiah the message with only 3 words, narrower. "Still good." He replied, "Better than wrong." That evening, he finally returned to Shaw's numerical methods workshop. He wore the same work shirt he had worn all day, though he had changed out of his gloves and washed the cleaning chemical smell from his hands. Nobody introduced him as a hidden genius. Shaw simply handed him a worksheet and pointed toward an open seat between an engineering student and a retired city planner taking the course for pleasure. Isaiah sat down. At the front of the room, Shaw drew a boundary condition on the board and asked the group what assumptions they would test first. Isaiah uncapped his pencil. 6 weeks later, room 418 looked ordinary again. The corrected paper had survived peer review with its narrower claim intact. Lena's fellowship renewal had been approved, and Owen had accepted a summer position in a computational lab across town. Claire remained at Bellwether, but no longer supervised students without a second faculty reviewer on access, authorship, or evaluation decisions. Her written sanction stayed confidential, as university discipline usually did. What changed publicly were the procedures: preservation requests, complaint reviews, anti-retaliation protections, and the requirement that disputed research access changes leave a second signature in the system. Isaiah's own record was cleaner than it had been before the incident. HR removed the temporary reassignment note and added his written response to the archived case, only because he asked them to preserve the sequence rather than erase it entirely. He wanted the difference documented. Marcus thought that was excessive until another custodian challenged an inaccurate complaint 3 weeks later, and the new review procedure caught the mistake before it reached a personnel file. After that, Marcus stopped calling the policy the Isaiah clause and started carrying printed copies in his supervisor binder. The mathematics mattered too, though not in the way the hallway gossip had predicted. Isaiah did not suddenly receive a faculty office or a doctorate someone had been hiding from him. Bellwether's continuing education program approved staff tuition assistance for one graduate numerical analysis course after Shaw helped him navigate the application. Isaiah enrolled as a non-degree student. He kept his custodial position, kept the early shift, and spent Tuesday evenings in a classroom where nobody cared which door he had entered through because everyone was too busy trying to make unstable systems behave. His first graded assignment came back with an 84. He stared at the number longer than he should have. Shaw passed his desk on the way out. "You look offended. I used to be better at this. You used to do it every day." Isaiah turned the paper over. He had lost points for skipping an error estimate because the result had seemed obvious. Recognition before arithmetic again. The same weakness, dressed in a different decade. Shaw tapped the page. "You found the right answer, not the right argument. That's why I took off 16 points. Isaiah laughed despite himself. Lena presented the revised model at the conference in May. Claire's name remained on the work because she had contributed substantially to it, but Lena delivered the talk, with Owen handling the sensitivity analysis. During questions, a reviewer asked why the final robustness claim was narrower than the preliminary abstract circulated months earlier. Lena did not mention Room 418, retaliation findings, or the man cleaning the board. She simply explained that an assumption had failed under expanded testing, and that the team had corrected the claim before publication. Afterward, she sent Isaiah a photo of the final slide. No victory quote, just the corrected range. He saved it. Claire eventually requested a meeting with him through HR. Isaiah declined the first invitation, then accepted a second 1 month later on the condition that Marcus attend. Claire apologized without the defenses she had used before. She said the marriage joke had been humiliating, the complaint had misrepresented the exchange, and her reaction to Lena had been retaliatory, even though she had not wanted to name it that at the time. Isaiah listened. "I thought I knew what kind of person was standing in front of me," she said. He looked at the work shirt he was still wearing. "You did know one thing. You knew my job." Claire nodded. "You just decided it told you everything else." There was nothing left to argue after that. By summer, the magnetic preservation cards outside teaching rooms were scuffed from use. Students ignored them. Faculty complained about the extra form. Custodians appreciated knowing whether a board could be cleared without negotiating their way through someone's mood. One Tuesday evening, Isaiah finished class and returned to room 418 to collect a forgotten notebook. On the center board, someone had left a new problem from an advanced seminar. He stopped, read the first 2 lines, and felt the old instinct begin arranging possibilities. Then his phone buzzed. The message came from Shaw. A community college across the river was looking for someone to lead a weekend workshop for adult students returning to mathematics after long gaps. Paid 6 Saturdays, no degree requirement beyond demonstrated competency and faculty sponsorship. Isaiah read the message twice. He looked at the equation on the board, then at the cleaning cart waiting outside the door for the night crew. This time, he did not reach for the eraser. He opened the workshop application instead.